Sharon Tate's house on Cielo Drive in Beverly Hills stands as a chilling reminder of one of the darkest moments in Hollywood history. Once a beautiful and serene home, it was the site of a gruesome crime that would forever change the lives of those connected to it. On the night of August 8, 1969, actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, and 4 of her friends were brutally murdered by members of the Manson family cult. The crime, shocking in its brutality, left a stain on the house that would never fade. The once vibrant home, filled with laughter and dreams of a bright future, now stood as a haunting, a symbol of violence and death. In the years that followed, stories began to circulate about strange occurrences in the house. Neighbors claimed to hear eerie sounds coming from the house late at night, even though it had been abandoned. People who dared to visit or tour the area spoke of a heavy, oppressive atmosphere, as though something unseen was watching them from the shadows. Some reported hearing muffled voices. Others claimed to have seen fleeting shadows passing by the windows like figures trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. But it wasn't just the outside that seemed to be haunted. Those who spent time in the house after the murders reported unsettling experiences. One woman, who stayed there briefly after the incident, described an overwhelming feeling of being watched, as if the house itself were aware of her presence. Objects would move inexplicably, and cold drafts would sweep through rooms, despite the fact that all windows and doors were tightly shut. Even more disturbing, a sense of deep sadness lingered in the air, as if the spirits of those who died there could never truly leave. Some claimed to have seen Sharon's image appear in mirrors, her face contorted in a silent scream, as if reliving those final moments of terror. Others felt an icy chill, followed by the unmistakable scent of perfume, a reminder of a life lost too soon. The house seemed to hold onto the memories of the brutal crime, like a dark memory imprinted on the very walls. When the house was eventually torn down in 1994 and replaced with a new mansion, it seemed as though the darkness that lingered there had finally been erased. But those who remember the history of Cielo Drive will never forget the horror that took place within its walls. The land, they say, will never be truly free of the restless spirits that continue to haunt it. As the years passed, the legend of Sharon Tate's house on Cielo Drive only grew darker. The mansion that replaced the original house seemed to draw a certain kind of person, wealthy buyers who didn't know the full history of the land they were purchasing. But it wasn't long before whispers began to spread among the new inhabitants and their guests. Those who lived there reported feelings of dread that seemed to permeate the air, an oppressive energy that couldn't be explained away by the luxury of the new construction. One resident, a high-profile businessman who had moved in with his family, recounted strange events that began within days of settling in. Late at night, he would hear the sound of heels clicking down the long hallways, echoing through the empty spaces. At first, he thought it was the sound of his wife walking, but when he went to check, the house was always empty. The footsteps, however, didn't stop. They continued to echo, growing louder and more frantic. One night, he followed the sounds, heart pounding, only to find nothing but an empty hallway, the air thick with an unnatural chill. The strange occurrences didn't stop there. His young daughter, who had been playing in the garden, came inside one afternoon, her face pale and trembling. When asked what was wrong, she whispered that she had seen a woman standing by the edge of the property, staring at the house. The woman's face was distorted, her eyes hollow, as though the very essence of life had been drained from her. The little girl was so frightened she refused to go outside again, and soon after, the family decided to leave. It wasn't just the residents who felt the house's dark grip. Contractors who worked on repairs and maintenance often spoke of strange sensations while working alone. One worker, who had been tasked with renovating the wine cellar, reported hearing low whispers in his ear, despite being completely alone in the room. The voices were unintelligible at first, but then they began to form words, disturbing words. He fled, unable to shake the feeling that something or someone had been watching him the entire time. But perhaps the most chilling account came from a paranormal investigator who had heard the rumors and decided to explore the site for himself. Armed with equipment, he spent hours in the house, attempting to make contact with any spirits that might linger there. First, there was nothing, But as the night wore on, the temperature dropped dramatically. His instruments began to pick up erratic spikes in energy, and the air around him became thick, like a heavy fog was suffocating the room. Suddenly, the faint sound of a woman crying echoed through the house, sending a shiver down his spine. He followed the sound to the grand staircase, where the temperature plummeted further. He felt a presence, cold and malevolent, watching him from above. As he shone his flashlight upwards, the beam of light caught a shadow moving across the second floor. The investigator, heart racing, called out, "Who's there?" But only silence answered him. His flashlight flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. And then, in the brief moment of darkness, he felt a sharp, icy hand brush against his shoulder. He spun around, but no one was there. The crying, now louder and more desperate, filled the air, as though the walls themselves were weeping. He backed away, but something seemed to follow him, whispers, faint at first, then growing in volume. "Leave, leave," they hissed. He bolted for the door, but as he reached the threshold, he felt something tug at his leg, dragging him back toward the house. His heart pounded as the door slammed shut in front of him, trapping him inside. He managed to break free, running out into the night, terrified, but he could still hear the whispers echoing in his mind. The investigator never returned to Cielo Drive again, but his experience was far from unique. There are stories of those who've tried to set foot on the property: visitors, tourists, curious thrill seekers, only to leave with an unsettling sense that they weren't welcome. Some say they've seen figures watching from the windows. Others speak of an overwhelming sense of fear that claws at their chest, warning them to turn back before it's too late. No one knows for certain what keeps the spirits of Cielo Drive tethered to the land. Some say it's Sharon Tate herself, her tragic death and unfinished life leaving her soul restless. Others believe it's the lingering darkness of the Manson family, their presence forever etched into the very ground. And still, others claim it's the house itself, a structure built upon blood, forever haunted by the violence and fear that once filled its walls. But one thing is certain: Cielo Drive is not a place for the faint of heart, and those who venture there may find themselves forever changed, whether they realize it or not. Because some houses don't just haunt, they consume. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The house on Cielo Drive was more than just a place, it was a force, an entity in its own right, alive with dark energy. As time passed, even the land itself began to change. Local lore spoke of how the earth seemed to drink up the tragedies that occurred there, as if it fed on the pain and violence of the past. People who had once lived in the area began to avoid the stretch of road, even though the mansion had been replaced long ago. No one seemed to want to talk about the house, but everyone knew about it. The air around the property felt different, heavy, like something unspoken lingered just beneath the surface. One night, an ambitious documentary filmmaker, eager to uncover the truth behind Cielo Drive, arrived with a small crew to capture the haunting on film. Armed with state-of-the-art cameras and equipment, they intended to stay in the new mansion overnight. They were confident until they set foot on the property. The moment they stepped past the gates, they felt it. The temperature dropped. The air turned thick and suffocating, as if the night itself had weight. The crew laughed it off, attributing it to the location's infamous past. But as the evening wore on, their sense of unease grew. By midnight, they had set up their equipment in various rooms, hoping to catch signs of paranormal activity. The first few hours were uneventful, but around 2 a.m., strange things began to happen. The first camera malfunctioned, flickering and cutting out every few minutes, despite being fully charged. A few minutes later, the sound of a door slamming shut echoed through the house, followed by a low, guttural growl that vibrated the walls. The crew gathered in the main room, trying to make sense of the noise. One of the cameramen, a seasoned skeptic, stepped into the hallway to investigate. He didn't return. The remaining crew members called out to him, their voices echoing in the silence. When they found him, he was standing at the top of the staircase, staring blankly ahead, his eyes wide with terror. His face was ashen, his body frozen. He wouldn't speak, couldn't speak. They managed to pull him away, but even as they led him outside, he kept repeating the same thing: "She's still here. She's still here." In the weeks that followed, the documentary was released, but only snippets made it to the public. The footage was unsettling, to say the least. The cameraman's sudden breakdown was just the beginning. As the crew reviewed the tapes, they noticed something horrifying. Throughout the night, strange shadowy figures moved through the rooms. In one clip, a figure resembling a woman could be seen standing by the window, her face obscured but her presence undeniable. In another, a distorted shape seemed to hover in the doorway, a dark, swirling mass that seemed to twist the very air around it. The most chilling part came when the camera, for no apparent reason, panned to the wine cellar. There, in the dim light, stood a figure faint, almost translucent, but undeniably real. The figure seemed to be looking directly into the camera, its hollow eyes locked onto the lens. Then it moved slowly, deliberately toward the camera, its form growing clearer with every step. As it drew nearer, the camera began to shake violently, before cutting to black. Despite the warnings from those who knew better, a few thrill-seekers still tried to test the house. They came with their own cameras, hoping for a glimpse of the unknown. But the house, it seemed, had no mercy. One by one, they came and went, but none of them ever returned unchanged. The stories they told were eerily similar. Vivid dreams of a woman, trapped in time, forever searching for someone to release her from her torment. Or worse, they spoke of seeing Sharon herself, her pale face twisted in an agonizing expression, as though she were calling out for help that could never come. One such visitor, a young couple, found themselves drawn to the house by the very same curiosity that had consumed others. They arrived late one evening, intent on uncovering the truth behind the haunting, armed only with their camera. They stood outside the gates, hesitant, but determined to capture anything that would prove the ghost stories true. As they wandered deeper onto the grounds, they stumbled upon a hidden, overgrown part of the property, something that had been missed by previous visitors. It was a small, seemingly abandoned shed, tucked away in a shadowy corner of the yard. Inside, they found a dusty old chest, covered in cobwebs. The moment they opened it, they felt a sudden wave of icy cold, a pressure pressing down on them, as if the house was aware of their trespassing. Inside the chest were old newspaper clippings, photographs, and documents, the kind of items you'd expect to find at a crime scene investigation. Among them was a journal, its pages yellowed with age. It was written in a shaky hand, but the words were legible. "The house. It watches. They won't stop coming. I see them now, all of them, trapped in this place. They can never leave. Neither can I." The couple left immediately, terrified, but not before they took one last look at the shed. As they turned to walk away, they saw something that stopped them dead in their tracks. Standing in the doorway of the shed was a figure, a woman. Her face was hidden in shadows, but the long, dark hair and flowing white dress were unmistakable. Before they could react, the figure vanished. And in that instant, they knew some things are better left unseen. The chest was never found again. Neither were the couple. Weeks after the young couple vanished, the eerie tales of Cielo Drive took an even darker turn. Despite the authorities' attempts to dismiss the rumors as mere exaggeration, there was an undeniable sense that something sinister had awakened on the property. Locals began to avoid the area altogether, but curiosity proved too powerful for some. More visitors, more thrill-seekers, continued to venture into the shadow of the mansion, only to return with unsettling stories that left them mentally scarred. One such individual was a well-known psychic medium, who, after hearing whispers of the house's supernatural reputation, decided to conduct a private investigation. She was no stranger to the paranormal, having spent years communicating with spirits. But even she wasn't prepared for the force that awaited her at Cielo Drive. The medium arrived alone under the cover of night. As she stepped through the gates, a palpable tension gripped the air, thick with unseen eyes watching her every move. She had been briefed on the history of the house, and she had come prepared to face whatever spirits lingered there. But something about the place felt wrong in a way she had never experienced before. The moment she entered the house, the temperature plummeted. Her breath became visible, a mist in the cold air, and a deep, gnawing silence filled every corner of the room. No distant traffic, no sounds of life from the surrounding neighborhood, only the silence of something ancient and forgotten. She began her ritual, lighting candles and placing crystals around the room to protect herself. But as she meditated, trying to reach out to any spirits lingering in the house, she felt a force much stronger than she had ever encountered. It wasn't just a haunting, it was a battle for control. Through her mind's eye, she saw flashes, violent images, blood-streaked walls, the terrified faces of Sharon Tate and her guests. Then, something shifted. The air grew heavier. The walls seemed to pulse with a rhythmic, almost heartbeat-like thrum. Her heart raced, and then, just as quickly, the vision stopped. A voice, low, guttural, barely a whisper, rippled through the room. One word cutting through the air, "Leave." She froze. The voice wasn't human, it was raw, primal. Like the house itself was speaking through the spirits it had consumed. She tried to focus, pushing against the oppressive force that pressed on her chest. But it was as if the house were trying to suffocate her. The walls, once still, seemed to breathe, and with each inhalation, the presence grew stronger. Suddenly, her vision blurred, and she saw something move in the corner of the room. A figure too tall and too thin to be human, standing in the shadows. It was dressed in tattered clothing, its face obscured by darkness. But she could see its eyes empty, black voids that seemed to stare directly into her soul. She staggered backward, her heart pounding, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The figure stepped closer, and the temperature dropped even further. The shadows twisted, forming shapes, whispers rising in volume, and the air seemed to hum with something ancient, something powerful. Before she could react, the lights flickered, and the figure disappeared, leaving only a faint echo of its presence behind. The medium's pulse raced in her ears as she stumbled out of the room, her head swimming with terror. The voice again, closer this time, almost like it was in her ear, whispered, "It's too late, outside." She found herself gripped by an overwhelming urge to leave, as if the very earth beneath her feet was rejecting her presence. She had barely reached the gate when she stopped dead in her tracks. There, in the distance, she saw a figure standing by the old shed, the same place where the couple had disappeared weeks earlier. It was the woman, but this time her face was visible, twisted, pale, with hollow eyes staring at the psychic. The woman's lips curled into a distorted, agonizing smile, as though she recognized the medium for what she was. The psychic was paralyzed, frozen in place as the woman stepped closer, her form shimmering, becoming more solid with each passing moment. She reached out a hand, the cold seeping into the psychic's skin, and with a voice that no longer sounded human, whispered, "You will stay here." Like the others, the medium felt the earth shift beneath her, as though the very ground were swallowing her. Panic surged within her chest, and she bolted toward the gate, but the shadows reached for her, pulling at her legs. Her vision blurred again, and just before she reached the safety of the street, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, as though something was stalking her, waiting for the right moment to strike. The psychic escaped, but not without leaving a part of herself behind. As she recovered from her ordeal, she tried to piece together what had happened. She went back to the footage she had captured during the night, hoping to find answers. The camera had caught strange, inexplicable things: the shadows moving, the unnatural flickering of the lights, and the distorted, anguished face of the woman in the shed. But in the final moments of the recording, something chilling appeared. As the medium fled toward the gate, a pale hand reached out from the camera, brushing against the lens as if attempting to pull the viewer into the frame. She stopped watching after that. But that wasn't the end. Months later, after the psychic's harrowing experience, a new chapter in the story of Cielo Drive began to unfold, one that would send ripples of fear across the city. The new owners, unaware of the house's brutal past, decided to renovate the property to suit their tastes, eager to make their mark on the infamous land. But as construction crews dug into the soil, something unexpected was uncovered: a hidden room beneath the foundation. The room wasn't on any architectural blueprints, and when they entered, they found more than just debris. It was a small, dark space, and in the center, a blood-stained mattress lay surrounded by discarded personal belongings. As the crew sifted through the items, they discovered old photographs, some dating back decades, others more recent. And in the corner of the room, buried under a pile of clothes, was a single object, a silver locket. The moment they touched it, a sharp, cold wind blew through the open doors, and the temperature in the room dropped. The workers froze, as if the locket had triggered something deep within the house, a dormant force that had been waiting, watching, biding its time. But before they could react, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, and a sound filled the room, low, guttural, like something ancient, awakening from a long slumber. The house was calling. As the crew stood frozen in the room, the locket's cold metal seemed to hum with energy, sending a wave of terror through each of them. The temperature plummeted, and the shadows seemed to twist, crawling toward the workers with a life of their own. The wind howled through the house, the sound of distant, agonized whispers growing louder. With a collective gasp, they dropped the locket and backed toward the door, but the shadows moved faster, closing in on them. The ground shook, and the walls groaned as if the house itself were alive, angry that its secrets were being uncovered. The crew fled, not daring to look back, but when they reached the street, the air felt suffocating, as though the house was still watching them. The next day, the workers returned to find the room sealed completely intact, as though nothing had been disturbed. The locket was gone, and the house had returned to its unnerving silence. No one spoke of it again, but those who had been inside that night couldn't shake the feeling that they had awakened something that should have remained buried. The house on Cielo Drive remains as it always has, silent, dark, and waiting. Some say it's not just the spirits of the past that haunt the property, but the house itself, a cursed entity with a thirst for the living. And once you step inside, you may never leave, at least not entirely. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.